Madam Crowl's Ghost by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. 20 years have passed since you last saw Mrs. Jolliffe's tall, slim figure. She is now past 70, and can't have many milestones more to count on the journey that will bring her to her long home. The hair has grown white as snow, that is parted under her cap, over her shrewd but kindly face. But her figure is still straight, and her step light and active. She has taken of late years to the care of adult invalids, having surrendered to younger hands the little people who inhabit cradles and crawl on all fours. Those who remember that good-natured face among the earliest that emerged from the darkness of nonentity, and who owe to their first lessons in the accomplishment of walking, and a delighted appreciation of their first babblings and earliest teeth, have spied up into tall lads and lasses, now. Some of them show streaks of white by this time, in brown locks, the bonny Gowden hair, that she was so proud to brush and show to admiring mothers, who are seen no more on the green of Golden Friars, and whose names are traced now on the flat grey stones in the churchyard. So the time is ripening some, and searing others, and the saddening and tender sunset hour has come, and it is evening with the kind old North Country dame, who nursed pretty Laura Mildmay, who now stepping into the room, smiles so gladly, and throws her arms round the old woman's neck, and kisses her twice. "Now, this is so lucky," said Mrs. Jenner. "You have just come in time to hear a story." "Really? That's delightful. N.A. O.D. Whited. No story. Oh, you are true for that. I sit at a W.I. my ain iron. But the barn here would not like, at these hours, just go into her bed, to hear tell of freets and boggarts. Ghosts? The very thing of all others I should most likely to hear of." "Well, dear," said Mrs. Jenner, "if you are not afraid, sit ye down here, with us." "She was just going to tell me all about her first engagement to attend a dying old woman," says Mrs. Jenner, "and of the ghost she saw there. Now, Mrs. Jolliffe, make your tea first, and then begin." The good woman obeyed, and having prepared a cup of that companionable nectar, she sipped a little, drew her brows slightly together to collect her thoughts, and then looked up with a wondrous solemn face to begin. Good Mrs. Jenner and the pretty girl each gazed with eyes of solemn expectation in the face of the old woman, who seemed to gather all from the recollections she was summoning. The old room was a good scene for such a narrative, with the oak wainscoting, quaint and clumsy furniture, the heavy beams that crossed its ceiling, and the tall four-post bed, with dark curtains, within which you might imagine what shadows you please. Mrs. Jolliffe cleared her voice, rolled her eyes slowly round, and began her tale in these words. Madam Crowl's Ghost. I'm an old woman now, and I was but 13, my last birthday, the night I came to Applewell House. My aunt was the housekeeper there, and a sort o' one-horse carriage was down at Lexo waiting to take me and my box up to Applewell. I was a bit frightened by the time I got to Lexo, and when I saw the carriage and horse, I wished myself back again with my mother at Hazelden. I was crying when I got into the bshay, that's what we used to call it, and old John Mulberry that drove it, and was a good-natured fellow, bought me a handful of apples at the Golden Lion to cheer me up a bit, and he told me that there was a currant cake and tea and pork chops waiting for me, all hot, in my aunt's room at the great house. It was a fine moonlight night, and I eat the apples, looking out o' the shay window. It's a shame for gentlemen to frighten a poor foolish child like I was. I sometimes think it might be tricks. There was 2 on the tap o' the coach beside me, and they began to question me after nightfall, when the moon rose, where I was going to. Well, I told them it was to wait on Dame Arabella Crowl, of Applewell House, nearby Lexo. "Oh, then," says one of them, "you'll not be long there." And I looked at him as much as to say, why not? For I had spoken out when I told them where I was going, as if 'twas something clever I had to say. "Because," says he, "and don't you for your life tell no one, only watch her and see. She's possessed by the devil, and more in half a ghost. Have you got a Bible?" "Yes, sir," says I, for my mother put my little Bible in my box, and I knew it was there. And by the same token, though the print's too small for my old eyes, I have it in my press to this hour. As I looked up at him saying, "Yes, sir," I thought I saw him winking at his friend, but I could not be sure. "Well," says he, "be sure you put it under your bolster every night. It will keep the old girl's claws off ye." And I got such a fright when he said that, you wouldn't fancy. And I'd a liked to ask him a lot about the old lady, but I was too shy, and he and his friend began talking together about their own concerns, and dowly enough I got down, as I told ye, at Lexo. My heart sank as I drove into the dark avenue. The trees stand very thick and big, as old as the old house almost, and 4 people, with their arms out and fingertips touching, barely girds round some of them, while my neck was stretched out o' the window, looking for the first view o' the great house, and all at once we pulled up in front of it. A great white and black house it is, great black beams across and right up it, and gables looking out, as white as a sheet, to the moon, and the shadows o' the trees, 2 or 3 up and down in front. You could count the leaves on them, and all the little diamond-shaped window panes, glimmering on the great hall window, and great shutters, in the old-fashioned, hinge on the wall outside, bolt across all the rest o' the windows in front. For there was but 3 or 4 servants, and the old lady in the house, and most o' tea rooms was locked up. My heart was in my mouth when I said the journey was over, and this the great house afore me, and I so near my aunt that I never said till knew, and Dame Crowl, that I was come to wait upon, and was afeard on already. My aunt kissed me in the hall, and brought me to her room. She was tall and thin, a pale face and black eyes, and long thin hands black mittens on. She was past 50, and her word was short, but her word was law. I have no complaints to make of her, but she was a hard woman, and I think she would have been kinder to me if I had been her sister's child in place of her brother's. But all that's no consequence now. The squire, his name was Mr. Sheridan Crowl, he was Dame Crowl's grandson, came down there, by way of seeing that the old lady was well treated, about twice or thrice in the year. I said him but twice all the time I was at Applewale House. I can't say but she was well taken care of, notwithstanding. But that was because my aunt and Meg Wyvern, that was her maid, had a conscience, and did their duty by her. Mrs. Wyvern, Meg Wyvern my aunt called her to herself, and Mrs. Wyvern to me, was a fat, jolly lass of 50, a good height and a good breadth, always good-humoured and walked slow. She had fine wages, but she was a bit stingy, and kept all her fine clothes under lock and key, and wore, mostly, a twilled chocolate cotton, red, and yellow, and green sprigs and balls on it, and it lasted wonderful. She never gave me nout, not the value o' a brass thimble, all the time I was there, but she was good-humoured, and always laughing, and she talked no end o' prose over her tea, and, seeing me so sackless and dowly, she roused me up her laughing and stories, and I think I liked her better than my aunt. Children is so taken a bit o' fun or a story, though my aunt was very good to me, but a hard woman about some things, and silent always. My aunt took me into her bedchamber, that I might rest myself a bit while she was settin' the tea in her room. But first, she patted me on the shoulder, and said I was a tall lass o' my years, and had spied up well, and asked me if I could do plain work and stitching. And she looked in my face, and said I was like my father, her brother, that was dead and gone, and she hoped I was a better Christian, and what doer that lids would not do anything of that sort. It was a hard saying the first time I set foot in her room, I thought. When I went into the next room, the housekeeper's room, very comfortable, yak, oak, all round, there was a fine fire blazing away, coal, and peat, and wood, all in a low together, and tea on the table, and hot cake, and smoking meat. And there was Mrs. Wyvern, fat, jolly, and talking away, more in an hour than my aunt would in a year. While I was still at my tea, my aunt went upstairs to see Madam Crowl. She's a-going up to see that old Judith Squales is awake, says Mrs. Wyvern. Judith sits with Madam Crowl when me and Mrs. Shutters, that was my aunt's name, is away. She's a troublesome old lady. Ye'll have to be sharp her, or she'll be into the fire, or out o' tea window. She goes on wires, she does, old though she be. How old? Says I. 93 her last birthday, and that's 8 months gone, says she, and she laughed. And don't be asking questions about her before your aunt. Mind, I tell ye, just take her as you find her, and that's all. And what's to be my business about her, please? Says I. About the old lady? Well, says she, your aunt, Mrs. Shutters, will tell you that. But I suppose you'll have to sit in the room with your work, and see she's at no mischief, and let her amuse herself with her things on the table, and get her food or drink as she calls for it, and keep her out o' mischief, and ring the bell hard if she's troublesome. Is she deaf? No, nor blind, says she, as sharp as a needle, but she's gone quite orpy, and can't remember nowt rightly. And Jack the Giant Killer, or Goody Two-Shoes will please her as well as the King's Court, or the affairs of the nation. And what did the little girl go away for? That went on Friday last. My aunt wrote to my mother she was to go. Yes, she's gone. What for? Says I again. She didn't answer Mrs. Shutters. I do suppose, says she. I don't know. Don't be talking. Your aunt can't abide a talking child. And please, is the old lady well in health? Says I. It ain't no harm to ask that, says she. She's toughened a bit lately, but better this week past, and I dare say she'll last out her 100 years yet. Hish! Here's your aunt coming down the passage. In comes my aunt, and begins talking to Mrs. Wyvern, and I, beginning to feel more comfortable and at home like, was walking about the room looking at this thing and at that. There was pretty old china things on the cupboard, and pictures again the wall, and there was a door open in the wainscot, and I sees a queer old leathern jacket, WI straps and buckles to it, and sleeves as long as the bedpost hanging up inside. What's that you're at, child? Says my aunt, sharp enough, turning about when I thought she least minded. What's that in your hand? This, says I, turning about with the leathern jacket. I don't know what it is. Pale as she was, the red came up in her cheeks, and her eyes flashed WI anger. And I think only she had half a dozen steps to take. Between her and me, she'd a give me a sizzip. But she did gee me a shake by the shout her, and she plucked the thing out o' my hand, and says she, While ever you stay here, don't ye meddle WI nowt that don't belong to ye. And she hung it up on the pin that was there, and shut the door WI at a bang and locked it fast. Mrs. Wyvern was lifting up her hands and laughing all this time, quietly, in her chair, rolling herself a bit in it, as she used when she was kin. The tears was in my eyes, and she winked at my aunt, and says she, drying her own eyes that was wet WI the laughing. Tut, the child meant no harm. Come here to me, child. It's only a pair o' crutches for lame ducks, and ask us no questions, mind, and we'll tell ye no lies. And come here and sit down, and drink a mug o' beer before ye go to your bed. My room, mind ye, was upstairs, next to the old lady's, and Mrs. Wyvern's bed was near hers in her room, and I was to be ready at call, if need should be. The old lady was in one of her tantrums that night and part of the day before. She used to take fits o' the sulks. Sometimes she would not let them dress her, and at other times she would not let them take her clothes off. She was a great beauty, they said, in her day, but there was no one about Applewell that remembered her in her prime. And she was dreadful fond o' dress, and had thick silks, and stiff satins, and velvets, and laces, and all sorts, enough to set up 7 shops at the least. All her dresses was old-fashioned and queer, but worth a fortune. Well, I went to my bed. I lay for a while awake, for of things was new to me, and I think the tea was in my nerves, too, for I wasn't used to it, except now and then on a holiday, or the like. And I heard Mrs. Wyvern talking, and I listened with my hand to my ear. But I could not hear Mrs. Crowl, and I don't think she said a word. There was great care took of her. The people at Applewell knew that when she died they would every one get the sack, and their situations was well paid and easy. The doctor came twice a week to see the old lady, and you may be sure they all did as he bid them. One thing was the same every time. They were never to cross or frump her, anyway, but to humor and please her in everything. So she lay in her clothes all that night, and next day, not a word she said, and I was at my needlework all that day, in my own room, except when I went down to my dinner. I would have liked to see the old lady, and even to hear her speak. But she might as well have been in London at the time for me. When I had my dinner, my aunt sent me out for a walk for an hour. I was glad when I came back. The trees were so big, and the place so dark and lonesome, and 'twas a cloudy day, and I cried a deal, thinking of home, while I was walking alone there. That evening, the candles being alight, I was sitting in my room, and the door was open into Madam Crowl's chamber, where my aunt was. It was, then, for the first time I heard what I suppose was the old lady talking. It was a queer noise like, I couldn't well say which, a bird, or a beast, only it had a bleating sound in it, and was very small. I pricked my ears to hear all I could, but I could not make out one word she said. And my aunt answered, The evil one can't hurt no one, "'Bout the Lord permits." Then the same queer voice from the bed says something more that I couldn't make head nor tail on. And my aunt met answer again. "Let them pull faces, and say what they will. If the Lord be for us, who can be against us?" I kept listening, with my ear turned to the door, holding my breath, but not another word or sound came in from the room. In about 20 minutes, as I was sitting by the table, looking at the pictures in the old Aesop's fables, I was aware of something moving at the door, and looking up I saw my aunt's face looking in at the door, and her hand raised. "Hish," says she, very soft, and comes over to me on tiptoe, and she says in a whisper, "Thank God, she's asleep at last, and don't you make no noise till I come back, for I'm going down to take my cup o' tea, and I'll be back I knew, me and Mrs. Wyvern, and she'll be sleeping in the room, and you can run down when we come up, and Judith will gee you your supper in my room." And with that she goes. I kept looking at the picture book, as before, listening every now and then, but there was no sound, not a breath, that I could hear. And I began whispering to the pictures and talking to myself to keep my heart up, for I was growing feared in that big room. And at last up I got, and began walking about the room, looking at this and peeping at that, to amuse my mind, you'll understand. And at last what should I do but peeps into Madam Crowl's bedchamber. A grand chamber it was, a great four-poster, flowered silk curtains as tall as the ceiling, and folding down on the floor, and drawn close all round. There was a looking-glass, the biggest I ever seen before, and the room was a blaze o' light. I counted 22 wax candles, all alight. Such was her fancy, and no one dared say her nay. I listened at the door, and gaped and wondered all round. When I heard there was not a breath, and did not see so much as a stir in the curtains, I took heart, and walked into the room on tiptoe, and looked round again. Then I takes a keek at myself in the big glass, and at last it came in my head, why couldn't I ha a keek at the old lady herself in the bed? You'd think me a fool if you knew half how I longed to see Dame Crowl, and I thought to myself if I didn't peep now I might wait many a day before I got so good a chance again. Well, my day, I came to the side o' the bed, the curtains being close, and my heart a'most failed me. But I took courage, and I slips my finger in between the thick curtains, and then my hand. So I wait a bit, but all was still as death. So, softly I draws the curtain, and there, sure enough, I sit before me, stretched out like the painted lady on the tombstone in Lexo Church, the famous Dame Crowl of Applewale House. There she was, dressed out. You never sid the like in they days. Satin and silk, and scarlet and green, and golden pint lace. By Jen. 'Twas a sight. A big powdered wig, half as high as herself, was atop o' her head, and, wow, was ever such wrinkles, and her old baggy throat all powdered white, and her cheeks rouged, and mouseskin eyebrows, that Mrs. Wyvern used to stick on, and there she lay proud and stark, a pair o' clocked silk hose on, and heels to her shoon as tall as ninepins. Look! But her nose was crooked and thin, and half the whites o' her eyes was open. She used to stand, dressed as she was, giggling and dribbling, before the looking-glass, a fan in her hand and a big nosegay in her bodice. Her wrinkled little hands were stretched down by her sides, and such long nails, all cut into points, I never sid in my days. Could it even have been the fashion for grit folk to wear their fingernails so? Well, I think you'd been frightened yourself if you'd a sid such a sight. I couldn't let go the curtain, nor move an inch, nor take my eyes off her. My very heart stood still. And in an instant she opens her eyes, and up she sits, and spins herself round, and down her, a clack on her two tall heels on the floor, facing me, ogling in my face her two great glassy eyes, and a wicked simper her wrinkled lips, and lang for's teeth. Well, a corpse is a natural thing, but this was the dreadfulest sight I ever sid. She had her fingers straight out pointing at me, and her back was crooked, round again Says she, "Ye little limb, what for did ye say I killed the boy? I'll tickle ye till ye re-stiff." If I'd a thought an instant, I'd a turned about and run. But I couldn't take my eyes off her, and I backed from her as soon as I could. And she came clattering after like a thing on wires, with her fingers pointing to my throat, and she marking all the time a sound with her tongue like ziz. I kept backin' and backin' as quick as I could, and her fingers was only a few inches away from my throat, and I felt I'd lose my wits if she touched me. I went back this way, right into the corner, and I gave a yellock. You'd think soul and body was parting. And that minute my aunt, from the door, calls out W.I. Blair, and the old lady turns round on her, and I turns about, and ran through my room, and down the stairs, as hard as my legs could carry me. I cried hearty, I can tell you, when I got down to the housekeeper's room. Mrs. Wyvern laughed a deal when I told her what happened, but she changed her key when she heard the old lady's words. Say them again, says she. So I told her. Ye little limb, what for did ye say I killed the boy? I'll tickle ye till ye re-stiff. And did ye say she killed a boy, says she. Not I, says I. Judith was always up with me. After that, when the two elder women was away from her, I would have jumped out at window, rather than stay alone in the same room W.I. her. It was about a week after, as well as I can remember, Mrs. Wyvern, one day when me and her was alone, told me a thing about Madam Crowl that I did not know before. She being young and a great beauty, full 70 year before, had married Squire Crowl of Applewale. But he was a widower, and had a son about 9 years old. There never was tale or tidings of this boy after one morning. No one could say where he went to. He was allowed too much liberty, and used to be off in the morning, one day, to the keeper's cottage and breakfast W.I. him, and away to the warren, and not home, mayhap, till evening, and another time down to the lake, and bathe there, and spend the day fishing there, or paddling about in the boat. Well, no one could say what was gone W.I. him, only this, that his hat was found by the lake, under a hawthorn that grows there to this day, and 'twas thought he was drowned bathing. And the squire's son, by his second marriage, with this Madam Crowl that lived sad dreadful lang, came in far the estates. It was his son, the old lady's grandson, Squire Sheridan Crowl, that owned the estates at the time I came to Applewale. There was a deal o' talk lang before my aunt's time about it, and 'twas said the stepmother knew more than she was like to let out, and she managed her husband, the old squire, W.I. her white heft and flatteries. And as the boy was never seen more, in course of time the thing died out of folks' minds. I'm going to tell ye new about what I said W.I. my own in. I was not there 6 months, and it was winter time, when the old lady took her last sickness. The doctor was afeard she might have took a fit o' madness, as she did 15 years before, and was buckled up, many a time, in a strait waistcoat, which was the very leathern jerkin I sit in the closet, off my aunt's room. Well, she didn't. She pined, and winded, and went off, torflin, quiet enough, till a day or two before her flitting, and then she took to rabbling, and sometimes skirling in the bed. You'd think a robber had a knife to her throat, and she used to work out o' the bed, and not being strong enough, then, to walk or stand, she'd fall on the flue, W.I. her old wizened hands stretched before her face, and skirling still for mercy. You may guess I didn't go into the room, and I used to be shivering in my bed W.I. fear, at her skirling and scraffling on the flue, and blaring out words that I'd make your skin turn blue. My aunt, and Mrs. Wyvern, and Judith Squales, and a woman from Lexo, was always about her. At last she took fits, and they wore her out. Tito was there, and prayed for her, but she was past praying with. I suppose it was right, but none could think there was much good in it. And so at lang last she made her flitting, and it was over, and old Dame Crowl was shrouded and coffined, and Squire Sheridan was rode for. But he was away in France, and the delay was so lang, that Tisa and Doctor both agreed it would not do to keep her langer out o' her place, and no one cared but just them two, and my aunt and the rest o' us, from Applewale, to go to the burying. So the old lady of Applewale was laid in the vault under Lexo Church, and we lived up at the great house till such time as the squire should come to tell his will about us, and pay off such as he chose to discharge. I was put into another room, 2 doors away from what was Dame Crowl's chamber, after her death, and this thing happened the night before Squire Sheridan came to Applewale. The room I was in now was a large square chamber, covered W.I. yak panels, but unfurnished except for my bed, which had no curtains to it, and a chair and a table, or so, that looked nothing at all in such a big room. And the big looking-glass, that the old lady used to keek into and admire herself from head to heel, now that there was N.A. Marrow, that wark, was put out of the way, and stood against the wall in my room, for there was shifting many things in her chamber, you may suppose, when she came to be coffined. The news had come that day that the squire was to be down next morning at Applewell, and not sorry was I, for I thought I was sure to be sent home again to my mother. And right glad was I, and I was thinking of her at hame, and my sister Janet, and the kitten and the pimag, and Trimmer the tyke, and all the rest, and I got so fidgety, I couldn't sleep, and the clock struck 12, and me wide awake, and the room as dark as pick. My back was turned to the door, and my eyes toward the wall opposite. Well, it could be a full 12:15, when I sees a light in on the wall before me, as if something took fire behind, and the shot ass o' the bed, and the chair, and my gown, that was hanging from the wall, was dancing up and down on the ceiling beams and the yak panels, and I turns my head out my shout her quick, thinking something must have gone of fire. And what should I see, by Jen, but the likeness o' the old beldam, bedizened out in her satins and velvets, on her dead body, simperin, her eyes as wide as saucers, and her face like the fiend himself. 'Twas a red light that rose about her in a fuffin low, as if her dress round her feet was blazing. She was driving on right for me, her old shriveled hands crooked as if she was going to claw me. I could not stir, but she passed me straight by, a blast o' cold air, and I sid her, at the wall, in the alcove as my aunt used to call it, which was a recess where the state bed used to stand in old times, a door open wide, and her hands grope in it something was there. I never sid that door before, and she turned round to me, like a thing on a pivot, flyer in, and all at once the room was dark, and I standing at the far side o' the bed. I don't know how I got there, and I found my tongue at last, and if I did in a blare a yellock, running down the gallery and almost pulled Mrs. Wyvern's door off T-hooks, and frighted her half out o' wits. Ye may guess I did in a sleep that night, and the first light, down me to my aunt, as fast as my 2 legs could carry me. Well, my aunt did in a frump or flight me, as I thought she would, but she held me by the hand, and looked hard in my face all the time. And she telt me not to be feared, and says she, had the appearance a key in its hand? Yes, says I, bringing it to mind, a big key in a queer brass handle. Stop a bit, says she, letting go my hand, and opening the cupboard door. Was it like this, says she, taking one out in her fingers, and showing it to me, with a dark look in my face. That was it, says I, quick enough. Are ye sure? She says, turning it round. Sart, says I, and I felt like I was game to faint when I said it. Well, that will do, child, says she, softly thinking, and she locked it up again. The squire himself will be here today, before 12 o'clock, and you must tell him all about it, says she, thinking, and I suppose I'll be leaving soon, and so the best thing for the present is that ye should go home this afternoon, and I'll look out another place for you when I can. Fain was I, ye may guess, at that word. My aunt packed up my things for me, and the £3 that was due to me, to bring home, and Squire Crowl himself came down to Applewell that day, a handsome man, about 30 years old. It was the second time I sid him, but this was the first time he spoke to me. My aunt talked him in the housekeeper's room, and I don't know what they said. I was a bit feared on the squire, he being a great gentleman down in Lexo, and I daren't go near till I was called. And says he, Smillen, what's up this here sin, child? It mun be a dream, for ye know there's a sick a thing as a beau or a freetin of the world. But whatever it was, my little maid, sit ye down and tell all about it from first to last. Well, so soon as I made an end, he thought a bit, and says he to my aunt, I mind the place well. In old Sir Oliver's time Lame Windle told me there was a door in that recess, to the left, where the lassie dreamed she saw my grandmother open it. He was past 80 when he told me that, and I but a boy. It's 20 years sin. The plate and jewels used to be kept there, long ago, before the iron closet was made in the heiress chamber, and he told me the key had a brass handle, and this he say was found in the bottom o' the kiss where she kept her old fans. Now, would not it be a queer thing if we found some spoons or diamonds forgot there? Ye mun come up us, lassie, and point to the very spot. Loth was I, and my heart in my mouth, and fast I held by my aunt's hand as I stepped into that awesome room, and showed them both how she came and passed me by, and the spot where she stood, and where the door seemed to open. There was an old empty press against the wall then, and shoving it aside, sure enough there was a tracing of a door in the wainscot, and a keyhole stopped with wood, and planed across as smooth as the rest, and the joining of the door all stopped wi putty the colour o' yak, and, but for the hinges that showed a bit when the press was shoved aside, you would not consait there was a door there at all. "Ha," says he, wi a queer smile, "this looks like it." It took some minutes wi a small chisel and hammer to pick the bit o' wood out o' the keyhole. The key fitted, sure enough, and, wi a strang twist and a lang screek, the bolt went back and he pulled the door open. There was another door inside, stranger than the first, but the lax was gone, and it opened easy. Inside was a narrow floor and walls and vault o' brick. We could not see what was in it, for 'twas dark as pick. When my aunt had lighted the candle, the squire held it up and stepped in. My aunt stood on tiptoe trying to look over his shoulder, and I did see nout. "Ha, ha," says the squire, stepping backward. "What's that?" "Gia, mother poker. Quick," says he to my aunt. And as she went to the hearth I peeps beside his arm, and I sit squat down in the far corner a monkey or a flaying on the chest, or else the most shriveled up, wizened old wife that ever was sent on earth. "By Jen," says my aunt, as putting the poker in his hand, she keeked by his shoulder, and said the ill-favoured thing, "How care, sir, what ye doing?" Back and shut to the door. But in place so that he steps in softly, the poker pointed like a sword, and he geese it a poke, and down it tumbles together, head in a heap o' byins and dust, little mayo in a hatful. 'Twas the byins o' a child, the rest went to dust at a touch. They said nowt for a while, but he turns round the skull, as it lay on the floor. Young as I was, I can say that I knew well enough what they was thinking on. "A dead cat," says he, pushing back and blowing out the candler, and shut into the door. "We'll come back, you and me, Mrs. Shutters, and look on the shelves by and by. I've other matters first to speak to ye about, and this little girl's going hame, ye say. She has her wages, and I mun mak her a present," says he, patting my shouter wi his hand. And he did gimmer a gowd pound, and I went aff to Lexo about an hour after, and sat hame by the stagecoach, and fain was I to be at hame again. And I never sid Dame Crowl o' Applewale, God be thanked, either in appearance or in dream, at Tefta. But when I was grown to be a woman, my aunt spent a day and night wi me at Littleham, and she telt me there was no doubt it was the poor little boy that was missing Salang Sen, that was shut up to die thar in the dark by that wicked beldam, wore his skirls, or his prayers, or his thumping cut be heard, and his hat was left by the water's edge, whoever did it, to mak belief he was drowned. The clothes, at the first touch, ran into a snuff o' dust in the cell where the byins was found. But there was a handful o' jet buttons, and a knife with a green heft, together wi a couple o' pennies the poor little fella had in his pocket, I suppose, when he was decoyed in thar, and sid his last o' the light. And there was, among the squire's papers, a copy o' the notice that was printed after he was lost, when the old squire thought he might a run away, or been took by gypsies, and it said he had a green-hefted knife wi him, and that his buttons were o' cut jet. So that is I had to say concerning old Dame Crowl o' Applewale House. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more timeless classics. Your support helps me create and share more stories with you. Thank you.